les amis, soyez les bienvenus. Bonjour à tous les amis. Soyez les bienvenus ici dans les studios de Globe à Montréal. On se retrouve comme chaque semaine, c'est notre rendez-vous. C'est tous les jeudis Sparkle Show. C'est la première émission francophone consacrée au leadership et à la croissance personnelle. Vous le savez aussi, vous avez Sparkle Show en version audio. Téléchargement gratuit pour une course à pied, pour un voyage, pour des transports. C'est une marche à pied tranquille. Vous pouvez télécharger Sparkle Show. Si vous avez un environnement Android, allez sur SoundCloud et vous choisissez mon podcast, Franck Nicolas, ou sinon vous allez dans l'environnement Apple, podcast, balados d'Apple, et vous notez le podcast de Franck Nicolas. Très bien. Aujourd'hui, coup de projecteur, je réponds à vos appels. Vous avez été très très nombreux en ce début d'année à nous envoyer des messages qui vont dans ce sens. Franck, peux-tu nous faire une émission spéciale entrepreneur ? Parce que c'est vrai que je sais que cette émission Sparkle Show, c'est énormément basé sur les sciences du leadership et la croissance personnelle. Mais est-ce que tu pourrais nous donner des conseils de développement personnel pour les entrepreneurs ? Et c'est vrai que ça fait un moment que vous me posez la question. Alors je vais le faire aujourd'hui. Ça y est, je vous ai entendu. Donc aujourd'hui, c'est pas je vous ai compris, c'est je vous ai entendu. Aujourd'hui, donc coup de projecteur, voilà, je viens vous servir les solopreneurs. Si vous voulez démarrer une entreprise, vous êtes salarié, vous voulez démarrer une entreprise on the side, à côté, pour ceux qui ne parlent pas le japonais. Eh bien, c'est votre émission. Si vous voulez créer une start-up à temps plein et quitter votre emploi, c'est votre émission. Si vous êtes un entrepreneur, infopreneur, c'est votre émission. Et si vous êtes déjà entrepreneur, ça veut dire avec des salariés et avec une belle expérience, c'est aussi votre émission. Aujourd'hui, nous l'avons intitulé Start-up. Éviter le crash. En cette fin du mois de janvier, la dernière émission, elle est consacrée à l'entrepreneuriat pur. J'aimerais aujourd'hui vous dire comment une entreprise, une petite entreprise, peut éviter de fermer ses portes. Comment éviter le crash? On en parle aujourd'hui. Très bien, start-up aujourd'hui, comment éviter le crash? Conseil numéro 1. Conseil numéro 1, il y a une grosse erreur, c'est vrai. Une très très grosse erreur de la plupart des entrepreneurs, c'est que, écoutez, voici la vérité froide et dure pour les entrepreneurs qui débutent ou qui n'ont eu aucune formation, parce que la plupart des entrepreneurs improvisent le métier d'entrepreneur. Ils apprennent sur le tas. Et pas vraiment. Les écoles de commerce, le niveau est tellement amusant que quand ils sortent d'une école de commerce, parce que la plupart sont salariés quand ils sortent d'une école de commerce, vous le savez, ça n'encourage pas du tout l'entrepreneuriat, mais quand ils sortent d'une école de commerce, les jeunes, ils connaissent pas grand-chose à l'entrepreneuriat, je vous assure que c'est vrai. Ils sont complètement perdus. Mais la vérité froide, c'est quoi? C'est que 9 startups sur 10, ou petites entreprises sur 10, ferment ses portes. Si vous continuez comme ça, c'est sûr que c'est la mort commerciale de votre entreprise. Ou même vous allez tuer votre projet tout de suite avant même qu'il s'amorce. Donc, je crois que ce que je voudrais dans cette émission, c'est vous amener à comprendre que vous pouvez éviter de dérailler en évitant des erreurs mais monumentales. Mais on veut augmenter vos chances de réussir. Alors la première erreur à ne pas commettre, que commettent la plupart des entrepreneurs, et ça c'est une grosse problématique chez beaucoup d'entrepreneurs, c'est qu'ils tombent amoureux de leur entreprise. Ils tombent amoureux de leur entreprise et ils tombent amoureux de leurs produits. Mais le marché évolue tellement que celles et ceux qui tenaient absolument à leur logo, à leur entreprise, qui n'étaient ni l'un ni l'autre adaptés au marché, ils ferment l'entreprise parce qu'elle n'est plus viable, ils sont incapables d'en recréer une autre. Mais comment se fait-il que la plupart des entrepreneurs en herbe, qui n'ont pas d'expérience, qui plantent une entreprise, en sont étonnés? Ils ne se forment pas, ils ne renforcent pas leur mental. Ils n'ont fait aucune formation depuis la sortie de leurs études primaires, initiales, que ce soit le secondaire, que ce soit un doctorat, j'en sais rien. Et ils s'étonnent de planter l'entreprise. Mais tu n'as aucune connaissance, tu t'improvises. Ou alors tu as étudié comment vendre du thé pendant 1 an. Et tu crois que tu vas réussir? Mais il y a plus de probabilités que la première entreprise se plante. Mais comment se fait-il qu'on en déduise qu'on est mauvais et mauvaise à ce point-là? Juste à la première plantade. Mais si vous saviez combien d'entreprises j'ai plantées, moi. Mais tous les grands entrepreneurs ont fermé beaucoup d'entreprises, ou de multiples entreprises, plusieurs entreprises, au moins une, qui a déjà réussi du premier coup. Mais c'est extrêmement rare. Ou en tout cas, c'est pas la majorité. Donc, comment se fait-il que dans notre tête, dès qu'on a un genou à terre, on soit obligé de fermer l'entreprise? Rien parce que je ne recommencerai pas, j'arrête la route parce que je ne suis pas ceci ou trop cela. Mais écoutez-moi bien, toutes les personnes qui n'arrivent pas à rebondir après un échec d'entreprise ont commis cette erreur. Ils étaient amoureux de l'entreprise, amoureux de leurs produits, pas de leurs clients, pas de leur marché. Ils n'étaient pas là pour servir les autres, mais pour se faire plaisir à développer le joli pot en poterie qui s'adore tellement que c'est mon produit à moi. Ça, c'est une grave erreur. Et dans le Weekend Spark, on va vous reparler de cela. Ne tombez pas amoureux de votre entreprise. Parce que si elle plante, vous pourrez redémarrer, puisque vous aurez toujours ce feu sacré dans le ventre de venir servir les autres. Et les autres seront toujours là. Mais peut-être que l'entreprise n'était plus adaptée ou pas assez bien conçue. Et les produits, c'est la même chose. Deuxième conseil, deuxième erreur à ne pas commettre si vous avez déjà une entreprise ou si vous voulez créer une start-up, c'est que beaucoup d'entrepreneurs manquent de soutien. Je vous l'ai dit, la conséquence d'être seul finalement, de ne pas être formé, c'est que vous manquez de bonnes connaissances et de bonnes stratégies. Ne restez pas seul. Formez-vous. Suivez des conférences, suivez des cours en ligne, rejoignez des groupes avec des entrepreneurs, mais ne restez pas seul. Qui vous a laissé entendre que vous deviez rester seul en entrepreneuriat? Surtout, jamais, jamais, jamais. Et évidemment, ceux qui se plantent le plus sont ceux qui restent seuls, qui n'ont pas d'associés, et en plus qui ne se forment pas, ou qui ne se forment plus. Vous avez besoin de soutien avec des vidéos, des audios, des livres, des conférences, des formations, du coaching one-one, des rencontres, du mentorat. Ne restez pas seuls. Nous, les francophones, notamment en Europe, on nous a appris dans les études à rester seuls. On avait des notations seuls, des devoirs à la maison seuls, ou des contrôles en classe seuls. Alors que regardez ce qui se passe aux États-Unis. C'est une immense force des États-Unis. On a beaucoup à apprendre des Américains. J'ai horreur de ces gens qui se moquent des Américains. Horreur de ça. Alors, je veux juste vous dire que ce n'est pas ma culture du tout. Je me ressemble pas du tout dans ce tissu social. Mais il ne faut pas se moquer, parce qu'il y a énormément de bonnes choses aux États-Unis. Et notamment dans les universités et même à l'école. Et dès le début, ils apprennent aux gamins, aux jeunes à travailler en groupe. Et sont notés en groupe. Des travails en groupe. En Europe, c'est très individualiste. Résultat de cela, c'est qu'aux États-Unis, ils ont plus l'habitude de travailler avec les autres. D'avoir des associés, d'avoir des sous-traitants, d'avoir des partenaires. Et c'est une très belle chance qu'on offre à nos gamins, qu'on n'offre pas encore en Europe, parce que c'est ainsi, c'est pas autrement. Ils ont une culture des notes en Europe, ça me gonfle ces diplômes. Inutiles la plupart du temps, sauf quand tu veux devenir médecin, avocat, infirmière, j'en sais rien, t'as des cours de métier, on a besoin de diplôme. Entrepreneur, c'est ce que je veux dire. Eh bien non, on va nous embêter avec cela. On nous embête avec ça. Et à l'école, on nous formate à travailler seul. Pour peu que vous soyez une fille ou un fils unique, alors là, vous êtes fait, là. Parce que du coup, vous n'avez plus du tout l'intention de travailler avec quelqu'un. Vous êtes même irascible au point que, oh, c'est mon entreprise, c'est mon nom, c'est ma marque, casse-toi. Et c'est terminé, et ça plante. Arrêtez d'être individualiste et de croire que ça va très bien fonctionner tout seul. La plupart des entreprises qui se plantent, c'est parce que le dirigeant ou la dirigeante reste seul. Et met son argent dans plein de choses, mais plus en elle et plus en lui. Mettez de l'argent dans votre leadership, dans votre développement personnel. Apprendre une langue étrangère, c'est du développement personnel. Mais est-ce que c'est essentiel? Oui, c'est essentiel. Parce que ça reste à vie. Et moi, ça m'a sauvé la vie. J'aimerais vous donner 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 erreurs. 5 erreurs que font les entrepreneurs ou les solopreneurs, ou les gens qui veulent démarrer une start-up. C'est dans un instant. juste après la pause.
Good and evil, because you're just forced to think, and it's just exhausting. You wish that he would just go away, which is why they're trying to not teach difficult books in universities anymore, so that people don't have to undergo the difficult process of actually having to think and transform themselves. Anyways, I read Jeffrey Gray's book, The Neuropsychology of Anxiety, and it was like that. He was something, man. Student of a psychologist named Hans Eysenck, who was the most cited psychologist in the 20th century, and really quite a good psychologist. He laid a lot of the groundwork for modern theories of temperament and personality. They've been modified since his work, but he got extroversion right. He was the first person to really identify extroversion in a manner that could be measured. Carl Jung actually invented the notion, but Eysenck figured out how to measure it, which is a big deal. And he also noted that there was another important personality dimension, neuroticism, which is the tendency towards negative emotion. And he got that right too, because that actually happened to be the case, and he figured out how to measure it. So Eysenck was the first person who really established conceptually the fact that we have two fundamental emotional systems, one positive and one negative, that they're not opposites exactly. They're actually separate biological systems. So some people can be extroverted, which means they're quite happy and assertive. They smile a lot, they laugh a lot, they tell a lot of jokes, they like to party. They always like to be around people. That's an extroverted person. And they can also be unhappy, worried, anxious, depressed, frustrated, disappointed. I mean, living with someone like that's quite a trip, because they're just all over the place. But but there are people like that, because you can be high in negative emotion and you can be high in positive emotion, or low in both, or whatever. And it's useful to know that. It's useful to know that about your partner and about the people around you. And if you are interested in this sort of thing, by the way, I have a personality test online at understandmyself.com, and you can go there, and it takes about...
You mentioned the just that will appear with the presence of AI. A Mustafa Lama Heavy plus sign. It is
which is it's probably the maternal instinct dimension, but at least it's the variance between compassion and competitive aggression. It's something like that, and that looks like a continuum. And there's another dimension, which is trait conscientiousness, which is integrity and dutifulness, orderliness, industriousness. And then finally, the fifth dimension, which is openness, which is like a hybrid between intelligence roughly, and creativity. And so you can go there and find out how you compare to other people. And that's kind of interesting and useful, because it's kind of useful to know who you are. And to know that that's actually who you are, that you have a nature. And some of that stuff's movable, but it's not as movable as you think. And the farther you want to move it, the harder it is to move. Like, you can take an introvert. You're an introvert if when you're around people, you get exhausted by it and you have to go off by yourself and recover. Then you're an introvert. And if you're an introvert, you don't really like being in groups. And so sales, maybe that's not for you, And that's a good thing to know, because if you're an introvert, why go be a salesperson and be miserable? Do something where you can spend time alone and not be miserable. That's better. You might as well match your occupation to your temperament rather than the other way around. Now, you can take an introvert. I've worked with lots of introverts who say had made pretty good progress in their careers, and they were at a point where they had to do a lot of social networking, and otherwise they were going to hit a plateau in their career. And they could be taught the skills of extroversion sort of one at a time, rather painfully. So they could learn them, they could accrue the skills, and that would broaden their personality outward into the, say, extroverted end of the continuum. But it didn't make them extroverts. And so they were still temperamentally introverts. And so, if you're a neurotic person, high negative emotion, you can learn to regulate your anxiety and so forth. But you hit a point of diminishing returns, and it's difficult. It's effortful. So, anyways, back to Eysenck, and then back to Jeffrey Gray. So Eysenck identified extroversion and introversion, or extroversion and neuroticism, and that's going to be very important in a minute. And Gray elaborated Eysenck's theories to a large degree, but he did that neurologically. He was he was a master of the animal experimental literature. And a lot of that's being phased out of universities because the regulations for animal experimentation have become so onerous and difficult that it's much easier for beginning scientists just not to bother. And that's a real catastrophe because we've learned a lot about the brain in the last 50 years, a lot. And we've learned very little about the brain from PET scans and MRI scans and like that complicated technology that's used to study human beings, and an unbelievable amount by studying animals. And you might think rats in particular, and you might think, well, you know, rats, wow, they're not much like human beings, you know, but that's wrong. You share, I don't know what it is, 90.5% of your genetic structure with rats. Some of you probably more than that. And, you know, we haven't devolved from the common ancestor with rats from an evolutionary perspective that long ago. I mean, like, it's millions of years ago, you know, but it's short compared to how long ago we devolved, let's say, from, or we devolved, I think that's good enough, from amphibians. And so we're a lot like rats, man, and we have the same skeletal structure, and our brains are quite similar, and the neurochemistry is very, very, very similar. I mean, the neurochemistry is similar right down to the level of crustaceans, which is why I wrote about lobsters in Rule 1, because I thought it was so bloody amazing when I came across that literature to see that when lobsters are defeated in a social contest and they lose their hierarchical position, that they undergo neurochemical changes that are analogous to the neurochemical changes that human beings undergo. That's so amazing. And that the same damn drugs that help us, antidepressants essentially, also cheer up defeated lobsters. I mean, it's a staggering demonstration of the continuity of biology across, you know, unbelievable spans of time. You know, critics have complained that I cherry-picked the data, but they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So they don't. I studied the serotonin system for a very, very long time, and I know perfectly well that one of the things that it does is monitor your position in a social hierarchy. And it's more important than that, because the serotonin system it's a master control neurochemical system. It's like the conductor of an orchestra. Everything in your brain depends on the serotonin system, which is why you think about it, like an antidepressant decreases the rate at which neurons will reuptake serotonin. You need serotonin to modulate the way your neurons work. You take an antidepressant and the serotonin works a little longer. Okay, so what's the consequence of that? Well, let's say you're depressed. Okay, we got to think about being depressed for a minute. So when you're depressed, this is what happens. All you remember about the past is what's negative. So everything about the past is negative. All you can see in the present is what's negative. Everything about the present is negative. And nothing about the future is positive at all. And so that's interesting, because it means that something has shifted inside you, let's say neurophysiologically, that changes the way you view everything. Everything. Your entire past, the present, and the entire future. And what it essentially does is exaggerate negative emotion to a tremendous degree, that's depression, and suppress positive emotion. Now, there can be variance in that. Sometimes you see depressed people, and you can think about your own mood in this way. You know, you might say, well, I'm not that sad, but I've just sort of lost my interest in everything. Okay, so that means that what's happened is your positive emotion system has been suppressed, because the positive emotion system is what gives you that interest in things, that pulls you forward to action, okay? And the negative emotion system, that's anxiety, that's a huge part of it. Frustration, disappointment, grief, pain, that kind of covers it. Anger is complicated because it's positive emotion and half a negative emotion, which is why it feels so good to get angry, by the way, and why it also impels you to action, whereas most negative emotions stop you. You know, so in any case, if your serotonin system, if your serotonin function declines, then all of a sudden everything is negative. You think, well, isn't that interesting? How the hell can it be that something can change within you that changes everything? And the answer has to be, well, it must be a fundamental system that's being changed, right? Because if it changes everything, it has to be a system on which all other systems depend. And that is the case with the serotonin system. And that's really worth knowing, especially when you also know that the serotonin system counts where you are in the social hierarchy. And so there's this weird kind of one-to-one correspondence. Imagine a social hierarchy has 10 levels. I don't care what hierarchy you're in. Most people's hierarchies are actually quite small. They sort of consist of the people that they compare themselves to, you know, which is a strange thing too, because one of the things that you see happening with really successful people is they actually don't get a lot happier and a lot less unhappy as they climb the broad social ladder, because the people they compare themselves to change. And so I can tell you a funny story about this. So I know this guy. I worked with him for a long time. His name is Dale Ressi. And he's a hell of a guy. He's like 6'7", and he's like really charismatic, and he's been pretty successful. He built this company in San Francisco called Founder Institute, and it's only one of many things he's done. And it's operating in 165 cities. It's a school to teach people how to be entrepreneurs. He's trying to export Silicon Valley what would you call it, know-how, technological and financial, to the rest of the world. And in like 5 years, he built 165 schools, not physical schools, but school-like organizations around the world. And like, go try that. Like, that's really hard, you know? Just to build one is hard, but to do that in multiple languages all over the world, it's bloody well impossible. And then at the same time, he built his organization, started 2,500 successful companies as a consequence of building this school. That's pretty good, you know. And he was having a rough time and was talking to me on the phone about you know, he wasn't so happy about what he'd done with his life. And he said, "Geez, I compare myself with my roommate, and you know, I've hardly done anything." And his roommate was Elon Musk. It's like I just laughed at him. I thought, geez, really? That's what you're going to... You haven't done anything compared to Elon Musk, and you're depressed about it. It's like, yeah, well, you and the rest of the planet. I mean, look, what did Musk what did he do? He invented an electric car. That's impossible. Then he made it work. That's impossible. And then he built an entire infrastructure to charge it, and that worked, and that's impossible. And they're good cars. Faster any car ever be, and cheap, and so that's impossible. And then that wasn't good enough, so then he decided that he would compete with NASA, which is impossible, and build rockets at 1/10 the price they were building them, except bigger, and then he would shoot his car on his rocket out into space. Right. And he did all that. And it's like a day I was thinking, well, I've hardly done anything with my life. It's like, oh. So, but my point is that, you know, primates of our type sort of have a group size that we think about as our group of about 200 people. So like on Facebook, for example, the probability that you're in something approximating reasonable, constant communication with more than 200 people is low. You just don't have the time, and you can't keep track of it. So our natural group is something like 200, and our groups tend to fragment when they get bigger than that. And that's also associated, by the way, with cortical size. You see this in primates, is that as primates develop larger brains, the group size that they seem to be able to manage also increases. And that might be part of the reason why they develop larger brains. Who knows? But anyways, it's about 200 people. And the problem is that as you get more successful, say, in the global hierarchy of 100 million people, the 200 people that you compare yourself changes. And so that you end up with $100 million, and you're not very happy because your $50 million yacht is like 20 feet shorter than your friend's, you know, $150 million yacht. And you're high in neuroticism, so that makes you frustrated and disappointed, you know. So anyways, it's important to understand. It's the message here, the point of this is that you have a system, the serotonin system, base of your neurophysiology. It also sets your brain up during embryonic development. So it really is It really is the master control system in many, many ways. And it counts where you are in your hierarchy. And then it decides how much positive emotion and how much negative emotion you should feel on average because of your position. And so like if you're, let's say number 1 is at the top and number 10 is at the bottom, so you're number 10, you're barely clinging to the bottom of reality, your brain says, look, it's dangerous where you are at the bottom of the hierarchy. You don't have a lot of friends. It's precarious down there. And so that means any little thing that goes wrong, any little error you make, that might be the end of you. And so you better be on guard and alert. And if something small happens, it better hurt, because it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And there's nothing pleasant about that. Like, it would be unpleasant about a process that magnifies everything negative you feel about anything that might be wrong, and not just on one small dimension of negative emotion, not just anxiety, which is bad enough, but anxiety and the pain-related emotions. So pain-related emotions are pain, obviously. That it generally indicates damage to a psychophysiological system, but grief is a pain-like emotion, and frustration is a pain-like emotion, and so is disappointment, and loneliness as well. Those are all pain-like emotions, and I've elaborated out of an underlying pain system. And so the negative emotion system is like a tree that has branches, and each of the branches is the separate negative emotion, but they're all tied together at the root. And positive emotions are like that as well, except they're not quite as differentiated. And so if your serotonin levels fall because you've suffered a hierarchical defeat, then the positive emotion system gets flattened so that good things no longer feel good, because it's dangerous to take risks, perhaps, if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy and you're not doing very well, which is why you're at the bottom. Why should you have any trust in yourself, and you don't have any friends, and you're not well situated in the social world? You're not going to be enthusiastically moving forward to do new things, and so your motivation for engaging in life declines, and it can decline pretty much to zero. If you see people who are seriously depressed, they say, well, I can't even listen to music anymore. It just sounds flat and dead. And if you talk to someone who says that about music, they're pretty damn depressed, because music is one of those things that virtually everybody always enjoys, at least one genre or another. And the depressed person will describe even that the sensory quality has changed. And then they also say they're absolutely overwhelmed with negative emotion. And so, okay, so that's a good thing. So that's a good, very interesting thing to know, is that the manner in which one of your fundamental neurochemical systems is tracking your position in a hierarchy is crucial to the maintenance of your emotional stability. Okay, so now you want to keep that in mind, because that's the first important point. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to do is explain to you how it is that the way you look at the world is related to the emotions that I just described. And then I'm going to talk about how that in itself is related to the idea of hierarchy, and we're going to explore from there. So when you look at the world, you think that the world is made of obvious objects, and that you look at them, and then you think about what they are, and then you think about how you evaluate them, and then you think about how you use them, and then you decide to act. And that's not the case, because the world doesn't come segregated neatly. And it took people time to figure this out, because when you look at the world, there it is, segregated neatly into objects, right? It takes no effort at all, except it takes half your damn brain to do that, right? And we're very visual creatures. We have great visual systems. And so a tremendous amount of metabolic energy and evolutionary expenditure of time has gone into providing us with a visual system that just breaks the world up into obvious objects for us. And that isn't even right, because we don't actually see objects. What we see are more like tools and obstacles. We just think they're objects. Like when you come in here, I can give you an example of that. Okay, think about a beanbag. Okay, think about a stump, and think about a stool. Say, those are all chairs. Okay, it's like, well, what do you mean they're all chairs? What do they have in common? Objectively speaking, a beanbag doesn't have legs. You know, a stump is rock hard and solid. A stool is something almost completely unlike a beanbag. Well, they're all chairs. Well, why? Well, the answer is you can sit on them. And so most of the things that we group together as objects, we group together as a consequence of functional utility, and not because they share a set of features that are objectively similar. And the reason that we perceive in that manner is because we don't really care that much about the objective features of the world, because we have to care about being alive. And so what we actually care about is what things do. And so we tend to see things that do things and group together perceptually things that do things. And so, you know, when you walk into a room like this, there is a trillion things you could look at. You could look at the color variation in the carpet forever. You know, if you came in here on a psychedelic, you might even do that, right? Well, it's interesting because one of the things psychedelics do is they decrease the degree to which you view the world in an iconic manner. And then you see the incredible complexity that's underneath everything, and it's absolutely fascinating. Now, it's not good because you shouldn't come in here and just look at the carpet for an hour. You know, it's not that productive unless you're trying to equate yourself, re-equate yourself with the fundamental wonder of the world, you know, and there is some utility in that. Artists do that, but practically speaking, it's not that useful. What happens when you come in here, you know, you have a goal in mind, you're going to watch what happens on the stage, you're going to listen, and so you only see what's relevant to that, and so what you see are chairs, and chairs are things you sit on, and so they pop up into your perceptual field just like that, and then you know what to do with the chair, you sit on it, and partly the reason you know what to do with a chair isn't because you look at the chair and you think, oh, look, a chair, because you didn't do that when you came in here, right? There wasn't a single one of you that came in here and looked, oh, chair, right? It's self-evident that they're there. What happens is that you look at the chair and it maps, the chair maps itself onto your body. Like you prepare yourself, the perception prepares you for the action. So as soon as you see the chair, which has a certain shape, so imagine it's a pattern that sustains itself in time, right? Because that's what a chair is. It's a pattern that sustains itself across time. And that pattern is transformed into a pattern of light, and then that's transformed into a pattern on your retina, and that's transferred into a pattern on your optical nerve, and then that's transferred into patterns all over your brain. And some of those patterns are the patterns that allow you to perceive the chair consciously, and some of them are patterns that enable your body to prepare to take this position in the chair, because part of what your eyes do is map right onto your motor system so that you look and you know what to do. And it makes you a lot faster, right? You look at something, you know what you're supposed to do with it, your body's prepared to do it. And that's kind of also what it means to understand something. You know, if you look at it, and you know what it is, you know how to use it, it means you can just map the thing right onto your body. And so people are very, very good at that. And especially as you develop expertise at something, you just get better and better and better at that. There are people that have certain forms of brain damage. Lermite syndrome, I think it was called, if I remember correctly, also known as utilization syndrome. And these are people who have a degeneration of the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that organizes your behavior, I would say, at the highest level of abstraction. So when you're thinking voluntarily about what you might do, and then you go do it, it's your prefrontal cortex that's thought that up voluntarily, and then organized the rest of your brain to go do it. And so it kind of, one of the things it does is inhibit all the other things you might do. So one of the things that happens to people who have prefrontal damage, especially if it's on the right-hand side, is they get very socially inappropriate because they have all sorts of whims and motivations and emotions that would normally be inhibited by, you know, attention to context, let's say, and the desire for voluntary activity, and they lose that part of the brain, and so they get disinhibited. They can get disinhibited to the point where they have to be institutionalized or jailed because they start acting so inappropriately that they can't be controlled. And so, anyways, Lermite syndrome is utilization syndrome. And one of the things that happens to people who have utilization syndrome, let's say they're in an old folks home, maybe it's a consequence of a degenerative neurological disease, and they're walking down the hallway and there's an open door. And they walk through it. They can't help it, because what do you do with a door that's open? You walk through it. Now, you don't if you're doing something else. If you're not doing else, because you have got the part of you that is helping you do something else, then the object just tells you what to do. You know, and you see this with little kids too, because whenever you present them with an object, you know, they grab it right away. They often grab it and put it in their mouths. And they do that because their mouths are already wired up completely when they're born, right? Both from a sensory perspective and from a motor perspective. And so kids are always cramming things into their mouth so that they can investigate them with their tongue and map what they are. It's important for them to, well, that's how they learn about the world. And so, anyways, if you have utilization syndrome, you can't not utilize things. So you can hand someone a bottle or a cup of water who has utilization syndrome, and they're not thirsty, and they'll drink it because it's a cup of water. And what is that? It's not an object. It's a thing to grip and drink. You know, and it's how else can you look at this? This isn't a cliff. It's a falling off place. Right, and if you're one of those strange creatures who just think it's a cliff, and you know you're, I don't know, what you're abstracted in thought, and you walk off, and then you're dead. It's a lot better to perceive it as a falling off place, which is what you do, because you know what it's like. You go somewhere that's steep, and you kind of play with the edge a little bit, and you can feel the falling off place map itself on your whole body. It's kind of a strange, I suppose, an interesting experiment to play with that. You know, you might be back here and you think, yeah, well, that's not too bad. I wonder if I can get a little closer, you know, and maybe you can, and maybe you can get, well, maybe you can get too close, and then you're an evolutionary mistake. So